You're watching a News Channel 20 special report, the Illinois Budget.
Good evening from the Illinois State House, a News Channel 20 special presentation of the Illinois Budget Address. I'm Adam Rive, State House reporter Jordan Abadea. Jordan, earlier today, Governor Bruce Rauner delivers his second budget address to Illinois lawmakers and the state as a whole. Last year, it was quite a different tone than many people were used to here in the State House. What'd you think of this year?
This year is unprecedented. We have never had a budget impasse last this long. We're 2/3 of the way into the fiscal year. The state is operating on court orders and consent decrees, spending more money than we're expected to take in, and there's no budget in place. So this is really uncharted territory for the entire legislature, and nobody even knew what to expect out of today's address.
Governor Rauner required by the Constitution to give a budget address. That's normal. It happens every year. What's not normal, as you said, 232 days now without a state budget. We're going to dive into a lot of analysis and interviews with lawmakers and a couple of our reporters here at the State House. But for now, let's jump into Governor Rauner's message. Let's look back at his address from earlier today.
Absolutely shocking. Unacceptable. Our people deserve so much better.
No surprises from Governor Bruce Rauner. Wednesdays, he delivered a second budget address to Illinois lawmakers.
This year cannot become a rerun of last year.
With the current fiscal year's budget negotiations mired in partisan inaction, the governor attempted to address next year's challenges.
Right now, we're headed in the wrong direction, and we have been for a long time. We need to work together to change the trajectory.
One of Rauner's proposals calls for the General Assembly to give him the emergency authority to make budget cuts.
No one can dispute that we have an emergency on our hands. It's not my preferred course of action. It wouldn't solve our long-term challenges, but it would, at the very least, allow us to stop digging the hole deeper.
He extended an open hand, in his words, willing to sign a K-12 education funding bill, Senate President John Cullerton's pension plan, and to continue negotiating with AFSCME.
Our government employees are terrific people. They deserve to be well paid. And under our proposal, they will still be the highest paid state workers in the Midwest.
But not once in the 27-minute address did he mention MAP grants or higher education funding, and rarely were social services mentioned, but the governor was optimistic.
If we do this, if we come together to fix our long-term challenges, we will support the human services safety net on which so many depend.
Not a whole lot of specifics out of that budget address that we heard today, but we did hear some numbers on education, and we are joined now by State Senator Mike Connolly. Thank you for joining us. You are a Republican, so obviously you heard a message that you enjoyed today, right?
Well, I heard a message of a governor who's willing to compromise and work with the other side. The governor is basically said there's two options here. You know, let's work together and have structural reforms, the things I've talked about and ran on, as well as revenue. He has agreed to revenue, which is a big ask for a Republican. And if you can't give me this type of global resolution to a budget, then give me the ability to make the painful cuts that I have to make, because we can't continue on this path.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle in both chambers of this State House have voiced their frustration, some more than others over the past year. But State Senator Sam McCann, one of your colleagues, a fellow Republican, said that it's time for the chickens to come home to roost and that people aren't working together right now. Let's listen to a little bit of what he said, and we'll talk about that in just a moment.
I guess our chickens have come home to roost, for the lack of a better way of putting it, and it's time to roll up our sleeves and join together, both chambers, both parties, with the governor, and get together on a budget that will make sure that all the critical services that Central Illinoisans and all Illinoisans expect and deserve.
Senator Sam McCann talking about rolling up your sleeves and doing a lot of hard work. What's different now than a year ago? Is there anything different? Because a lot of people, a lot of voters and constituents would say you should have been doing this the whole time.
Well, I think rank and file people are meeting, and I think more now than ever, in having conversations both sides of the aisle.
Amongst each other?
They are, and I'm not going to explain who exactly I'm talking to, and it's from both chambers as well. So there is a level of frustration unlike anything we had before, a year ago certainly, because I think by and large there's a very large majority in both chambers who know what we have to do, know that there's certain things that have to be done to get the state back on the right path, fiscally, for heaven's sakes, and we're ready, willing, and able to do that. Certainly there's a primary election coming up, which probably plays a role in how this building operates, but by and large, in this session, I think, unlike anything, I've been here 6 years, and I've never had so many, let's just say, conversations with people on both sides of the aisle about, would you support this and would you support that? So, yeah, I do think the rank and file are, there's a strong percolation, you might say, from the rank and file that's starting to come to the top.
We heard the governor talk a lot about the turnaround agenda. That's something we've heard about all year. But he's pushing these new reforms. He's calling them transformations, inside government, procurement reform, updating the IT structure throughout the state. These are things that people maybe on the outside don't care so much about, but things that save a lot of money. Are you hearing that this could be maybe an area of bipartisan support that can move us a little bit closer to a budget?
Well, there's a lot of that. In fact, the governor, I back home in Naperville, I tell people that administratively there are things we're doing without having to go through the legislature to change how we do business here in Springfield. But for example, Senate Bill 2404 is President Cullerton's pension reform bill. I'm, I think, the only suburban Republican senator who voted for that bill. Is it an overhaul of the pension system? No, but does it save real money over time? Yes. That's a perfect example of a bill where it's President Cullerton's baby, by and large, and the governor supports it. It's a small, it would be a victory. I wouldn't say a small victory, a good, solid victory. So there are things we can do to keep moving the ball forward. And again, I think there's a wide amount of support for doing just that. So I think there's opportunities.
We heard a little bit from President Obama 1 week ago in that chamber talk about the small victories, significant but smaller compared to a budget which is larger. Now, it sounds good for constituents to hear they are working together on small things, percolating, as you say, meetings, but until the big one gets passed, does any of this mean anything?
Well, I think it does. I think you have, for example, we had a meeting this afternoon on the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. I'm a conservative Republican, former prosecutor from DuPage County. Kwame Raoul is a liberal Democrat, former prosecutor, to be sure, from Cook County, and we're meeting on very structural reforms to criminal justice here in Illinois that is kind of the right thing to do, but it also saves big money over time. So there are things happening. I guess I'm a glass half filled person. There are things happening. As far as a large global resolution to all of the problems here in Springfield, at this point as a rank and file, I will take singles and doubles and wait for the grand slam later. But I do think those singles and doubles do add up to big victories.
Right back to work tomorrow. We'll see how that goes here. State Senator Mike Connolly, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back on News Channel 20, we'll check in with our friend Amanda Vinicky from WICS Radio and analyze some of Governor Rauner's speech. You're watching a News Channel 20 special presentation.
Our costs of government have grown rapidly, while our tax base, families and companies who pay for it all, is declining.
Governor Rauner very clear earlier today on what he's pushing for as far as economic reform goes, saying you need to expand that tax base. If people are leaving the state of Illinois, we can't get revenue from them. State House reporter Jordan Abadea, Adam Reif here at the state capitol, talking about Governor Rauner's budget address earlier today.
Yeah, a lot of it was turnaround agenda back again in full force because you can't expand the economy.
Though he didn't say those words. He did not say turnaround agenda, but
no.
we heard a lot
But we
of it.
heard the reforms and we heard the need to expand the economy, to bring in more revenue to the state. He says this is going to be a comprehensive fix.
Let's bring in our friend Amanda Vinicky from WICS Radio. Amanda, you're the State House Bureau Chief. You are on the beat every single day along with Jordan. This budget address did not have an entirely different tone from 1 year ago, though we did hear new information. What was your take today?
Well, so what we heard that was new is that he wants to give more money to education. That's not a surprise. He's prided himself as the education governor. But it was interesting that he wants to keep that separate, part and parcel of the rest of this budget argument. So that's different, that he really starkly laid out the choices. I mean, in a sense, this is really the same pattern we've been operating in for basically a year now, but he laid it out as A or B. We got a bit more detail from the governor's budget office, kind of administrators over there that said that they have some extra ideas in terms of ways to reduce spending if legislators will give them that authority. Part of that is outside of this monster bill that they want that would give the governor almost unilateral, it's like carte blanche to manage the budget if they don't go around with the turnaround agenda. Other elements of that, they say that they want to dip again into, for instance, pensions and look at some ways that the state can achieve savings there.
We didn't hear a whole lot of specifics. Throughout the speech, I was really hoping to maybe hear some numbers. It is a budget address. We only heard them in reference to education. And as you mentioned, a budget official from the governor's office then debriefed us later in the day. There were more numbers involved, and I understand numbers are hard for people to understand, but were you surprised by the lack of information throughout the budget address?
You know, when you don't have any good news, I guess it's not surprising that a governor is going to stand at the podium and shout from the rooftops how terrible things are. But as you noted, Jordan, I mean, it is the budget address. And you heard Senate President John Cullerton say this wasn't a budget. This was more of a sketch. There was no blueprint whatsoever. So if you were looking to this budget address to get true answers from the governor in terms of what he wants, what would be acceptable if it does get to the point where they talk about revenue, you didn't get it. Taxes, yeah, he said I'm open to that. But again, we've heard that before. Where he'll go, what he'll do, we don't know. He said that he'll leave behind some elements of the turnaround agenda. You don't need it all. But again, no details, no specifics in terms of what he will leave behind.
And talking about those details, Michael Kerrigan, president of AFL-CIO, has not hid his displeasure with Governor Rauner's performance over the past year. He had some very strong words for the governor's budget address. This was after. Take a listen.
How does it affect transportation, or how does it affect veterans, or how does it affect the other department or agencies? So I think he took a pass. Quite honestly, he's pretty gutless. He should have identified the cuts that he would make. That's a budget.
Amanda, you mentioned this power that the governor has asked for. This is Plan B, but he wants basically emergency powers to make cuts. $3.5 billion, upwards of that, is what he'll need to make to balance this budget on his own. Lawmakers don't seem like they want to give up that legislative power to him, but can you ask for that power and then not give them the information on what you're going to cut?
No, I mean, you try to get some details along those lines, and they say, look at our last budget address, and that'll give you some sort of clue. So maybe you look again at child care subsidies, Medicaid, either who is eligible for it or the rates that doctors receive or hospitals. They say that those are already some of the lowest in the nation. Basically, in order to make $3.5 billion of cuts, you're going to be cutting anywhere and everywhere you can. So that's the answer that I think I can give to legislators, but you're right, it's pretty astounding that the governor didn't say that. Again, there are some probably pretty clear political reasons for it, especially if it doesn't come to fruition. We've seen the governor lay out cuts before and really be taken to task for it in the media, because nobody likes to hear, oh, cuts, and you have all of the people that depend on those services that are, have a massive outcry about it. So I think that's the reasoning behind it, but you're right, he didn't, yet again, no detail in that regard.
But again, if cuts are the reality, I think people deserve to hear that. We'll fact check the governor's address over the next few days. So I won't say it was dishonest, but he certainly wasn't forthcoming in saying this is what is on the table. It's no secret the state of Illinois is struggling. There's nothing wrong, I think, with saying things need to be cut, and these are what they are. We've certainly talked about them for the past 8 months. I want to go briefly here to a soundbite we have from Cinda Klickna, the president of the Illinois Education Association. K-12 education, as we've talked about, getting a huge boost under the governor's plan. However, Ms. Klickna not happy with the governor's budget proposal for different reasons. Let's take a listen.
We have families and students who are hurting in this state because of cuts to other programs. And we need a comprehensive budget, not a standalone budget that will just divide and conquer.
After this.
And so you heard a lot of those cuts that the governor would have to make would be to human services, services that people need because of the way our budget structure is set up. Quickly, what do you think about that? Is education good if you're going to cut the rest of the services that the state relies on?
Well, so what you hear from advocates is that school children don't just go to school. Of course, after that, they go home to their families, and that is where the state often provides help to low-income families, to those that maybe have disabilities, so that kids can can grow up in a well-rounded home, again, not just when they are in the schoolhouse. So it's interesting politically, however, for the governor to do this, because you have everybody who can dispute that education is something that they care about and that is a top priority. So here we go. He says, give me a clean bill, put this as the top priority, and if Democrats don't do that, he can turn around and say, hey, look, this is what I wanted, and it's Democrats' fault that your kids can't go to school this fall.
No games, a clean bill. That was the phrase used twice during the address, and yet we didn't hear MAP grants once or higher education. Certainly a lot of follow-up stories. A lot to talk about, so little time. Amanda, it was great to see you again. We appreciate your time. Amanda Vinicky from WICS Radio. We're going to head to break here. Back in just a moment with more on News Channel 20.
The true solution to fixing our budgets is to raise revenue by expanding our tax base and growing our economy, not by raising taxes and driving more jobs and families out of our state.
Welcome back to News Channel 20 special presentation of the Illinois Budget Address. Adam Reif, Jordan Abiday here in the state capitol. Again, that was the 2016 budget address, even though it had a lot of similarities to the 2015 address. We just heard that soundbite about Governor Rauner trying to expand the tax base once again, hitting economics and also hitting education today.
Yeah, education, a big point of the governor's turnaround agenda. So we have State Senator Andy Menard. You have been a champion of education funding. That is no secret. The governor is proposing putting record amounts of money, actually funding education at 100%, but you say the system's broken. So how's that not going to help the system?
Well, I think first I would say this. The governor has highlighted this issue, which is a step in the right direction. Where we have a disagreement, though, is how we spend our money. There's not enough money in the state budget to fix the problem alone by just spending more. We have to spend our money better. That's what we've been trying to promote in the Senate. Our caucus has taken a very strong position on this issue for good reason. We spend $12 billion a year today under today's budget, and we can spend it better. And I think we have to do that first before we ask taxpayers to fork over more money into our state system, which is the least equitable in the country.
Spend it better is one of the themes that we heard from Democrats or those organizations that opposed the governor's address or maybe thought there were other things he could have talked about. We have a soundbite here coming up from State Treasurer Mike Frerichs, who talks about how displeased he is that the governor didn't talk about higher education. K through 12 got a lot of play, as we know. $75 million increase for early education funding would be a record, but Treasurer Frerichs says that's not enough. Let's take a listen.
Well, he said education is very important, but he's not going to fund MAP grants for poor students. You know, we don't stop our education in 12th grade or in 6th grade. We need to fund all of education. He proposed a piecemeal budget, and it's the wrong way to move the state forward.
And so Treasurer Frerichs talking about a piecemeal budget there. He talks about MAP grants and them not getting enough funding, something you've traveled throughout your district talking about. What is the challenge here? As you say, not enough money, and so we deal with the adequacy issue again at a different level. How do you get better spending when there's not enough to go around first?
Well, I think you have to start with finishing a framework for the current fiscal year. I think that was a glaring omission in the governor's speech today. I think that's number one. Number two, if you take a step back from what he presented verbally today in his speech, there wasn't a whole lot of details associated with an actual budget proposal, which is what we work off of in the legislature. That's our first step, is accepting that proposal from the governor and beginning that process, which in the Senate is going to begin first thing in the morning tomorrow with a committee hearing. So we have to finish this year's budget, and first and foremost under that agenda is higher education and MAP grants without question.
The governor talked a little bit about how we have talked about the school funding reform formula, and they had previous plans have pitted districts against each other. I don't know if he was alluding to your plan or not, but can you speak a little bit about why this isn't a game of winners and losers?
Yeah, this is the most frustrating part. When I hear the governor say what he said today, it's with complete disregard to the failings of today's system. We have hundreds of school districts in Illinois that lose money every year, despite the fact that we have put more money in year to year. We increase spending for school funding, yet our inequity gets worse. The governor fails to acknowledge that time and again. He failed again today to acknowledge that. And by the way, those districts that lose money, like 186, like Bunker Hill, where I live, they have the highest tax rates, the highest poverty rates. We have losers every year. We need to step away from that type of rhetoric if we're going to solve this problem.
There's another soundbite I want to play in just a moment here from Comptroller Leslie Munger. There was a lot she liked from the budget address today, obviously part of that Rauner administration. What she talked about was the fact that if people are calling for more spending without having the money to back it up, it's hurting that bottom line of the budget, of the backlog of bills, $7.1 billion as of today. Let's listen to Comptroller Munger. We'll talk about it in just a moment.
Every time the legislature passes a bill without any spending, it just puts people at the end of a very long list of people who are able to be paid but have to wait for payment because we only have so much money. I try to remind everyone it doesn't help to promise spending when there's no money to write the check.
And so this gets into prioritizing resources and prioritizing who needs the funding. As you say, there's simply not enough to go around. And if Comptroller Munger says we're going to keep adding spending without having the funding behind it, what does that do to the backlog of bills? How do you in the Senate, when you caucus, when you work across the aisles, I'm sure you do, prioritize who needs what first?
Well, I think the Comptroller makes a valid point. You know, the governor called for increased spending today in education, for example. I would welcome her support for our efforts to reform school funding because we are putting into motion the issue that she just articulated. We can spend our money better today, get better results, have more equity among the state's public school district, but that takes work, takes time, takes negotiation, and that's something that we haven't done yet, and we ought to do it.
All right, State Senator Andy Menard, we appreciate your time. Back to work tomorrow, as you mentioned, so excited to see what comes out of this session, and I'm sure we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Back to wrap things up after the break. Stay with us on a News Channel 20 special presentation.
We can do this. We must do this. Every hardworking family across this great state deserves no less. Let's get this done together.
Governor Bruce Rauner with words of optimism as he wrapped up the 2016 budget address earlier today at the State House. Jordan Abadea, Adam Reif here to wrap things up on our special presentation. We heard the governor touch a little bit on revenue. Is that a real option here for this General Assembly?
It is a real option as long as they will agree to reforms. The Republican governor has gone against his principles and said, I'll agree to giving you guys some sort of tax increase. But we heard today from a senior official within the administration, they don't know exactly what that revenue increase will be.
All right, let's take a listen here to a soundbite coming from Representative Rob Martwick, who talks about the reality of needing to raise revenue.
Right now, we're showing a lack of courage across the whole state to actually deal with the problem that we have. We have to start addressing it honestly and in earnest, and that's going to involve taxes. The governor, as much as admits it, he just won't address the taxes until we give him his policy agenda.
A lot of arrows coming from Democrats and from organizations opposing funding cuts and asking Governor Rauner to do a little bit more. He said time and time again he'll take those arrows. Back to work tomorrow for session. Do you expect anything significant to get done this week?
We are going to hear some committee reports on this new budget proposal, and we'll have to see if Democrats are going to play ball and at least give it a fair shot.
All right, we've got all the information on our website, newschannel20.com. Stay tuned to Fox at 9 and News Channel 20 at 10. For Jordan Abadea, I'm Adam Reif. Have a good evening.